Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome once again to a Greater Lawrence Chamber of Commerce Chamber Chat. My name is Brad Kloppenstein, President of the Greater Lawrence Chamber. Thank you all for joining us. We have a very special guest this week, a longtime friend of mine because he used to be a neighbor of mine when I lived over in the Community Heights and Irvington area. He's also the newest member of the Indiana legislature, representing House District 100. Welcome to Lawrence Chamber Chat, Blake Johnson. Blake, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You're welcome. You're like a new baby. You're newborn. We just got to bring you home, and here you are.
Does it feel like that? Does it feel like that to you, Brad? I'm happy to be here, even if it's the newborn baby thing.
No. I know you know what you're doing, and you're going to do a great job. So, so your district is pretty much from it runs about Shadeland, and I want to say Washington up to 21st to 30th-ish, and then all the way into almost downtown. So you used to represent a good portion of that in your city council district, and now you're going to be in the legislature. So for those who are here who might not have ever heard of Blake Johnson before, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so the District 100 is Mass Ave, Fountain Square, Twin Air, Christian Park, Irvington, goes to Bean Creek down kind of by Garfield Park, all the way out to Shadeland. I'm 4 days into the job. This is day 4 as a state rep, so it's all very, very new. I was elected to the city council twice, the first time in 2015. At that time, I was 29, so that made me the youngest member of the council in about 25 years, which I was always pretty proud of. I was elected a second time here in 2019 with the resignation of Representative Forrestal. Some things kind of got sped up in terms of how we were going to fill that spot, so lucky enough to do that now. I grew up in Daleville, Indiana, if anyone's familiar, East Central Indiana. It's about 2,500 people in a White Castle. I moved to Indianapolis right after college to teach in the Indianapolis public school system. After that, I worked on political campaigns for a little while back in the 2011 cycle. Took a job with Congressman Carson on the Hill for a couple years, then left government for a season, about 5 years, to work in national nonprofit called Complete College America, focused on college completion and closing achievement gaps. And now I run a nonprofit focused on getting young people more involved in the city and state. And I'm really embarrassed, but I warned Brad that there is a phone call that I was absolutely going to have to take if it came in, and I need just 1 minute, and I will be right back with you. I am so sorry.
We will give you 1 minute. This is funny. All right. So for those of us who are here, Blake did tell me that he was expecting a plumber to call. He's like, I thought the plumber would have called by now. Got my fingers crossed that maybe he'll call when we're done. Apparently he called when we started. So Erica, I'm gonna have to use my editing skills and figure out how to edit this little snippet out when we do this. So we'll give Blake just a second.
So Brad said this was informal, and I'm really glad because having a little bit of issues here, so that we're trying to deal with. So yeah, I was gonna say that, like, nonprofit called Indie Hub Foundation. We focus on getting 20 and 30 somethings more connected to the city, more involved, with the long-term goal of ensuring they stick around. Because like many other cities, we are in a struggle and fight to gain talent and to keep talent, to have employees in our companies. And so we are really deeply involved in that. And the last thing I'll say, just as a way of kind of biography, is my first gig in any kind of public service was at church. My grandparents every Sunday had me at the front door of our church, and my job was to greet everyone, open the door, welcome them in. And so I think that's kind of framed my entire career, where I've always felt like I need to be the person who make everyone feel like they were welcomed, they belonged. So Indie Hub does that. I've made that a part of my kind of my focus as an elected official. And then at the State House, obviously I have opportunities to do that as well around economic development and talent and all of that.
So now for those watching, well, Blake used to be my city councilman. He and I first met. He was in his first year of his first term on the city council, and we spent quite a bit of time one summer helping Community East Hospital, who was wanting to rebuild their hospital and reinvest on the east side. We helped them get some zoning approved that had originally been denied. And obviously, Community Hospital has a big footprint in Lawrence Township. So Blake is very familiar with some of the players that we have up here. Blake, let me ask you. So, what are you most proud of as far as your accomplishments in the last 5 years on the council?
Yeah, it's a great question. The thing I'm probably most proud of, I told you I came from a nonprofit focused on higher education, public policy, and kind of towards the middle of my term, the mayor asked me to be involved in the creation of what would be a promise program for area students. And for those that aren't familiar, promise programs are generally scholarship programs that focus in on students from low-income families in an effort to ensure that they can go to college and complete a degree. One of the things as a country we've done a great job over the last couple decades is to make the freshman class look a lot more like America than ever before. More students are going to college, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of race, regardless of gender. That class is representative of our country. Unfortunately, the graduating class in higher education is not. It is still predominantly white, and that's been a problem for our nation as it relates to being able to fill talent pipelines. And so the mayor asked me to be involved in that while I was still a vice president at Complete College America. I got to chair that group and help design that program. And we ultimately launched Indy Achieves, which is sure scholarship dollars, which is part of it, but it's also making sure we're leveraging the state funds that exist because there's a lot of state money to help kids go to college. But then also thinking about what can we do from a lens of mentorship, from helping students find greater purpose in what they're studying to ensure more actually go on to graduate and earn that degree. So that's probably number one, top of the list. My wife and I also launched our own scholarship program right after I got elected to serve as kind of a mechanism to help students who are focused on community service get a little bit of extra money for college as well. And over the course of 4.5 years on the council, we've given away almost $50,000, which has been pretty extraordinary. Brad mentioned the hospital. That was one of the first things I got to do after I got elected, which was a whirlwind way to learn about city government. And so, we were there at the table, talking with the hospital, talking with neighbors, trying to assuage the concerns of some neighbors who are really, really worried about the investments being made. But ultimately, the project was $300 million invested in Community Heights neighborhood, locks that hospital in for another 60 years. Which is really a windfall for the community to have such a great anchor institution right in the heart of it. So, it's been a wild 4.5 years for sure. But one of the things I love about city government is just the ability to get stuff done kind of quickly if you want to, right? I mean, that's not to say government doesn't still move slow, but at the same time, in city government, on the city council in particular, you can have an idea today. It can be written into the law, a month later and be executed the month after that. And that's a pretty extraordinary thing, especially if you can build a coalition to get things done, which I was always excited to be able to do.
So now your wife, Natalie Clayton, she actually is president of the Community Heights Neighborhood Association, or Community Heights Neighborhood Organization. How is she liking that role?
Yeah, I think, Natalie's always been really involved, kind of a fierce volunteer all the time for whatever organization she's been engaged with. And she'd been in Community Heights for, over 10 years. So I think she really loves the opportunity to have a voice in a lot of the issues facing our city, especially facing the neighborhood. And, she's a realtor as her full-time job. So she really loves homes and building homes and building community. So I think it's been a perfect fit for her, and absolutely.
So now I do have to ask, now that your district is bigger, does that mean you might be moving to a different neighborhood?
I don't think I'll ever convince Natalie to sell the house we're in. She loves this house. I love this house. We love the East Side. But yeah, I mean, obviously you go from, representing 28,000, 30,000 people to a little over 60,000 people. There's some cool neighborhoods throughout the 100th district. But the other thing to consider too is that after the re-election in November, hopefully, we'll have one term, those 2 years. Then redistricting hits because of the census. So the way 100 is drawn right now is not the way 100 will be drawn in 2021. So we'll just see. You know, Brad, you're very familiar. This can go a number of different ways. You can get drawn in with another member of the legislature. You can get drawn in a way that's great for you. And so we'll just have to see where the districts lie and what that means for us. But for the meantime, for these 2 years, hopefully these 2.5 years, depending on how the election goes in November, I'm excited to kind of to take a swing at this and see what we can do to make the city and state even stronger.
So, hey, one of your former colleagues is joining us right now.
Okay.
So let me ask you, what are your thoughts? Obviously, when you were on the City County Council, you were in a vast supermajority. You're now going to a body where you're going to be in a vast super minority. What are your thoughts on that? What are your feelings? And how is that going to be different for you?
Well, yeah, I suspect that'll be very different. You know, I was chairman of the Admin and Finance Committee here at the end of my time on the council. You know, was going to have quite a bit of influence over the budgeting process and what that final budget looks like. Now I'll be, like you mentioned, part of a super minority. At the end of the day, you know, I've always believed that good government's about building coalitions. It's about finding common ground, coming to the table, not drawing lines in the sand when you don't have to. And I think that's probably informed a bit by the fact that, I mean, I grew up in rural Indiana. I live now in metro Indianapolis, right? So I think that I've got at least the right temperament to approach conversations in a way that doesn't just say, I'm right, you're wrong, this party's right, this party's wrong. When it comes to making the state better and making quality of life better for Hoosiers, I think we should be able to find common ground. The tech innovations that are being spearheaded in Indianapolis are benefiting rural communities and agriculture, and the housing policies and the way that we're developing living environments here informs how the rest of the state works too. And we've got to remember the great role that rural Indiana plays in feeding this state and feeding this city. And I think we're all in this together, right? So at the end of the day, my hope is I can go to this body where I'll be in the minority, but still build the kind of relationships where we can get things done for the city of Indianapolis, for Lawrence, for the state as a whole. And I think as long as I approach it that way, the way I've always tried to approach my career, we'll still be able to get some stuff done.
Nice. I'm going to call on our newest attendee to this, City County Councilor Dan Boots, who's a former colleague of yours now. Dan, do you have any advice for Blake as he moves on to the legislature?
Yes. Can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah, just fine.
Okay, sorry, I'm having some IT issues. Well, first I wanted to congratulate Blake on his ascension, if you will. And I guess my only primary comment would be, please don't forget the common villagers on the other end of Market Street. And,
no concern there.
Yeah.
I think the beauty of going from the council to the state house is a vast appreciation of the work that happens at the local level. So I'm excited to be a partner for sure.
Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you, sir.
So with that, do we have any questions from our assembled audience for Blake Johnson, or any words of wisdom as he moves down Market Street? If you come up with anything, just raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll go back to the Brad and Blake show. So Blake, now that you have kind of changed bodies and your focus is going beyond Marion County now, and you have more of a statewide focus, what are some of the goals, or what are some of the things that you're looking forward to being involved with and you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, you know, based on what I do for a living, I still think talent issues are huge. We tend to be a state that is still an exporter of talent, and that's incredibly problematic. You know, we're home to some of the best companies in the world, and struggling to fill vacancies is not a place we need to be. So I think from a couple standpoint, what are we doing at the higher ed level to ensure that we're building natural pathways into employment opportunities here in the state? What kind of partnerships are we building? What are we doing to ensure we remain attractive to people from all over the country, from other cities who they would look at Indianapolis seriously and think of us as a place to come plant roots? Other than that, you know, obviously I have with an education background, we still have a lot of work to do if we want to claim that we've got the best education system in the world. And I think that's going to be a part of how I've got to approach my time in the State House too, is what we're doing to strengthening our education system, ensuring that we're recruiting and retaining great teachers, great school leaders. I think that's critical. And the other thing I'll say too is just from an income and wages standpoint, wages have remained pretty flat, and I think that we've got to do a better job of recruiting the kinds of companies and investment and entrepreneurs who can pay good wages for our state, because as you all know, I mean, without good wages, it's really, really hard to fuel some of the other investments and economic development that we'd like to see, both in the city as a whole and included cities, all of that.
With that, I also want to give a shout out to the city of Lawrence for winning the Mira Award for being the rising tech city in the state of Indiana. Congratulations, Lawrence. Blake, remember, if you ever need a new place to land, if they draw you out of your district, come to Lawrence. We'd love to have you.
I'll keep that in mind.
So I want to go to a little bit more of a serious topic and just kind of talk about what are your thoughts on what's been going on with the pandemic, followed by a little bit of civil unrest, followed by the city's response to picking up the pieces after the civil unrest.
Sure. I think by and large, I'm pretty proud of the city and state as it relates to response to COVID-19. You look at all the metropolitan statistical areas in the country, recent numbers put Indianapolis at number 2 in terms of being able to slow down the spread of the virus among all MSAs across the country. I think, the Democratic mayor and Republican governor have worked really, really well together. Some things that, I still wish we had. I wish we were being a little bit more firm on the use of masks and face coverings. I think that we know that can be really, really helpful in the spread. And it's still very frustrating for me to be out in the community and see people not heeding that advice. But at the same time, right, part of this challenge is how do we continue to slow the spread of the virus? How do we address those issues while trying to insulate our economy from the greatest amount of damage? And so I think even the mayor today, just as we were logging on, was holding a press conference about some support the city's trying to lend to businesses. I know the state's obviously thinking pretty deeply about ways to support businesses as well. But I think the best thing we can all do to ensure we're stabilizing the economy is when we are out and trying to patronize places that we are wearing face coverings, that we are practicing social distancing, that we're doing the things we know help contain this virus. And I'm hoping that we can all commit to doing that, because that's what keeps us open. It's not a margin of just going in and spending money. It's also doing our part to ensure that we're protecting the economy from further damage and another wave of infection. As it relates to civil unrest, I think we're seeing a new spotlight on some things that have been a problem for a long time. And I think one of the challenges is we have a hard time in moments like this being able to hold two things true at the same time. On one side, there have been an extraordinary number of instances of police brutality across the country, moments that are horrifying for all of us to see, that we see officers abusing power. These things happen, right? And we see it very vividly in certain cases, in particular, especially with George Floyd. On the other side, there are still great officers, right? Officers who believe in serving others and taking care of folks. Now, the key is, how do we have those two sides talk to each other in a way that makes sense? I think we've had good conversations around use of force policy and thinking about how we adjust to be explicit about what is okay and what is not okay. And one of the things in terms of the way we've reviewed policy is a duty to intervene, right? So if you're a good officer and you see an officer doing something they shouldn't do, to speak up. And that's not easy to do. And I think we can all recognize that there's a great challenge there. But these are the things that have got to start happening for us to address this in a meaningful way. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk about defunding the police, which I think isn't actually what the idea is. It's more about reallocating funds to investments in neighborhoods, which I think we should all be able to get on board with, the idea that it sure would be great if as cities we could spend more money on things that support and fortify our communities rather than just protecting our communities from crime and violence. This is a long-term strategy, though, and it takes a lot of rethinking. It takes rethinking about how we train officers. It takes rethinking about the way we look at mental health. The fact that so many times our officers are responding to mental health crises rather than someone who's really trained to do that is problematic. So there's so many facets to how we approach all of this. But at the end of the day, the reality is true, right? That there is a little bit of challenge in the way police forces are trained, in the way they de-escalate, and we're not doing a good enough job in handling that and ensuring that every single community is treated equitably as it relates to our police force. So my hope is, as a state and as a city, we're thinking about training, we're thinking about how we allocate funds in a way that's reasonable and intentional and thoughtful. But at the end of the day, we have to be listening. Right. And I think, I'm as guilty as anyone of sitting on the sidelines a little too long and not speaking up quickly enough. And my generation of leader is not going to stand for that anymore. Right. And as it relates, especially to issues of police violence, I've received, and I think both Counselor Evans and Counselor Boots are on the call now. I've received, 1,000, 1,500 emails on this issue, more than any other time in my time on the council, more than any other issue of advocacy. I mean, even thinking about transit, we did not receive the kind of outreach on transit that we are on this. So we've got to be willing to work together and all come to the table and recognize that there's some systemic and structural problems that have to be addressed. And I think that we're headed down a good path, and leaders are reacting and feeling the pressure, and that's a very, very good thing.
You're muted, Brad.
Yeah, Brad, we're not hearing you.
I got to apologize to everybody. Similar to your phone call, Fortune Academy decided to mow the grass right now.
That's fair.
So one other question is kind of a follow-up to that. Obviously, downtown's kind of a mess right now, and I think as the people who normally work and entertain themselves downtown have kind of stayed home, that void, it seems to have been filled by the homeless and people that have just kind of wanted to become squatters. How does the city deal with that issue?
Well, I think the key to anything around homelessness is how we do so with compassion, right? And I think that we've still got a long ways to go. We are working on housing first solutions as a community. And that's key, right? I mean, we are one of the largest cities in the country that doesn't actually have a city-led effort around housing and providing shelter. So there's just frankly not enough space as it relates to being able to take care of our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. I think I want to go back also to mental health. I think what we see also in the homeless community is a whole lot of folks who are facing mental health challenges and have not been able to seek and receive the help that they need. So from a standpoint, I get there's this economic concern and what it means for a downtown economy, but my primary concern is what are we doing to actually take care of people? And we have not hit the nail on the head with that yet, despite I think a whole lot of really, really great efforts underway. I think at the same time, part of what's keeping people away from downtown, I don't buy that it's a fear of protests, and I don't buy that it's a fear of homeless people. I think people are most concerned about the virus still.
Yes.
And we've seen some data, especially as it relates to millennials and Gen Zs, a group that really does help fuel local economies as it relates to kind of some of the particular industries that downtown relies on. And they're still saying they're 6 months out from feeling good at all about revisiting some of these establishments, especially without, requirements for masks, requirements for social distancing, right? So I think we got to do a good job of, like I said before, taking steps to strengthen businesses, provide resources where we can to help get them through what has been a really tumultuous storm. We have to heed the calls for change that we're seeing from protests to show that we're a city that gets it, that we're a city that cares about addressing structural and systemic racism. And we've got to do more as it relates to issues of mental health and taking care of our homeless neighbors. I mean, I think that's the trifecta of how we get downtown back on track. And there's a lot of smart people working on it, a lot of people who really, really care about the future, who have nuanced approaches to all this and don't see it as just one piece of the puzzle above all others. And I think we got to continue coming to the table and collaborate. We're a city that's always done a good job of public-private partnerships, coming together, thinking about how we solve problems, and we have a challenge in front of us right now that I think is going to require all hands on deck.
Nice. Now, kind of opposite of me asking Dan Boots to give you advice as you move on, I see that we've been joined by a very new Indianapolis City County Councilor, Ethan Evans. Blake, do you have any advice for Ethan as he embarks on this journey as a counselor? I know he's fairly new to politics, so you're an old hat compared to him.
I don't know about an old hat. I still feel young and vibrant. Ethan doesn't need my advice. He's doing a great job. He's hopped on real quick here and taking the time to get up to speed on the issues. It's the same thing about what the kind of taking my own advice, right? When we go to the State House and remembering that this entire business, the business of governing, of being entrusted with these roles, is to be willing to build relationships, to be willing to admit when you're wrong, and be willing to learn along the way. Far too often, and I think why people get so pissed off at politicians generally, is we seem to want to pretend that we have all the answers all the time, and that's just not the case. We're regular people, just like everybody else. I mean, I deal with the same issues in my neighborhood that anybody else does. But the key to being a good leader is being willing to learn on the job, to recognize your own shortcomings, to work on those areas of weaknesses, and to rely on other people. And I think that's where we could all do a little bit better of a job. I think any politician who always has an answer to your questions isn't one you can trust. Because at the end of the day, you're just demanding to be let down if that's what you expect of your public servants. So I'm real excited that the council is younger than it's ever been. We're a full third millennial. When I got elected, I was the only truly young person on the council, and now there's a ton of people who are younger than I am. And I think that's good for the future of our city. And I'll tell you another thing that's really interesting to me is I'm a real student of data as it relates to advocacy and getting involved in a community. And quite frankly, millennials and Gen Z even more than millennials don't really buy into kind of traditional political structures and institutions, right? So as the Republican Party, as the Democratic Party, we still have a lot of work to do, even to just convince this next generation of activists that party involvement or running for office is the way to get anything done. And I'm really hopeful that we can solve that problem, because I think getting involved and running for office is a really, really great way to make an impact, but we've got to do a better job making the case. And I think it's up to especially young leaders to show and model what it's like to really be invested and do the job the right way, because that's what's going to give way to other young people feeling like this is the way they can make an impact.
We had a follow-up question from the Greater Lawrence Chamber Chair, Cassandra. Cassandra, if you're unmuted, go right ahead.
I wanted to piggyback on Brad's question about downtown. We still see a lot of businesses boarded up and kind of looks like a ghost town down there. Have we had any opportunity to talk with any of those businesses? Do we know kind of where they are in terms of putting glass back in and reopening, and when might we start to see some of those boards come down?
Yeah, I suspect that's a great question, Cassandra. I'd say part of this is insurance, right? I mean, a lot of the response in terms of like just the glass repairs are insurance. I'll tell you, it's been really uplifting to see the businesses that have chosen to take those boards and turn them into murals, to kind of speak to the moment, right, and to speak to the conversation that our community and our nation's having right now. I know that a lot of that stuff's in process. Most of the business owners are not, I will tell you, not talking about how worried they are about getting the glass back in place, but they're worried about getting customers back in the door generally. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to still be selling downtown and talking about the value it has, and patronizing where we can, right? I mean, I have two family members, my mother and my father-in-law, both with weaker immune systems due to illness. I'm being particularly cautious, but we're still trying to pop in and grab takeout from a restaurant where we can, or to order things online from small boutique businesses. I think that's something we can all be doing right now. And then as things are safer and we get to our own levels of comfort, that we continue to support those businesses as well. I know another initiative was just launched by Visit Indy, giving 50% off hotel rooms downtown for Indiana residents. Again, as someone who gets to work with a lot of really bright people all of the time who are thinking about these challenges, strategies are in motion. How do we kind of help revive the tourism industry? How do we continue to support these businesses? And I know that from the mayor to the civic organizations in our community, everyone's taking it very, very seriously and bringing people to the table to find real solutions.
Thank you, Blake. So I've got a question. So what was the thing that you and Natalie missed most when we were all kind of shut down? And is that the thing that you did first once things started to reopen?
So admittedly, like I said, because of some family health issues, we haven't fully gotten back engaged in kind of the reopening outside of occasionally grabbing a meal and bringing it home. I just miss being around actual like people. Not you all are real people, obviously, but like there's something lost in translation across a Zoom screen. And that's been kind of tough. So every moment I've kind of had a chance to sit down with someone, from a distance of 6 feet and with a mask on, that's been pretty good. I'm kind of an extraordinarily intense extrovert, so I miss actual interactions. I also I miss hugs. I haven't been hugged by someone outside of a family member in quite a while, and I just that's kind of a weird thing you don't realize you're going to miss. There's this kind of loneliness that comes with this new virtual world that's a little frustrating. I will say also I do miss I miss Blackacre. I was sporting my Blackacre Brewery shirt today. Being able to go and just sit in the neighborhood. Brad, as you know full well, around Irvington and Community Heights, you pop into Blackacre or Giacomo, and you're going to run into 25 people that you've gotten to know in the community. So those moments are definitely making the heart grow fonder. The absence of those moments. So hopefully, the key for me is getting a vaccine on the table. It's ensuring that folks are getting tested appropriately. It's taking the steps necessary for us all to feel more comfortable. And you don't want us to be, you see these videos of really crazy stuff happening and people fighting with each other over having to wear a mask and all. And I get that there is this argument to be made from folks about personal freedom, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to protect each other and take care of one another. And as long as we approach it from that lens, hopefully we can kind of get through this in a way that makes sense. So if you don't have a face covering, the city's giving them away for free, cool indie masks. They're breathable and nice. Please take advantage of that and continue doing what's necessary on a personal level to protect your neighbors because that's truly, if for no other reason, then that's what strengthens our economy is knowing that we continue to see these numbers go down in terms of infections, that we continue to protect the healthcare system from being overloaded. That's how we know we can be on the right track. And like I said, Indianapolis are doing a pretty good job, especially in comparison to some other states around the country. But we've got to keep at it, and I think that's going to be critical.
It's funny you said that about Irvington. Irvington and Lawrence aren't much different. Here, you pop into Giacomo's, you pop into Triton Brewery, you see a bunch of your neighbors.
That's right.
It's all kind of the same. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'll give one last opportunity for anybody here to ask questions. I saw Belinda gave you a big thumbs up in the chat comment, so keep up the good work from her and from me. And Blake, if you need a hug or a beer on a porch, I'm offering. You can come out here. I'll swing by your house again, and
I appreciate it.
And we'll make that happen. So any other questions from anybody here? If not, I will thank you all for attending. Blake, thank you very much for being so gracious to join us and share your thoughts on your new role and talk to those of us up here in Lawrence. I will also make an offer. As I tell everybody every week, keep in mind, tonight is the Greater Lawrence Chamber Cruise-In that happens every Wednesday from 5 to 8 p.m. It's going to be a little hot, but looks like the weather's going to hold out. So, Blake, if you want to come up, I usually have a cooler, and we'll get 25, 30, maybe 40 really cool old cars that show up, and it's a great old time. Porter Books and Bread will have a table set up. They'll be selling sandwiches and beverages, alcoholic and non-alcoholic, for your enjoyment. Next week, tentatively, we have Kevin Rader of WTHR Channel 13. He announced his retirement last week after 33 years. And Kevin has said, minus any other disasters that might come up, he will be our guest on Chamber Chat. We will talk to him about his 33 years on the air. So, Blake, thank you. Welcome to the Indiana Legislature. Thank you for being a very good friend. Thank you, everyone who has joined us, and hopefully we will see you all again next week at 1:30. Take care.